Hi everyone and welcome to Hit the Apex. This is our end of season review at last, and I guess we're doing it a bit differently this time, not the traditional way, traditional podcast should I say. We're on camera. We're going to split it up for you into a few different parts, talking about all the different narratives of 2017 and the year it was for Formula One. So we'll start off talking about the championship, midfield battle, stuff like the silly season, all the politics, and then of course we'll talk a lot about other championships as well around the world. So without further ado, I'm Jawad as always, joined by Baden, and here we are at last. 2017 is coming to an end. We've already wrapped up everything, all the championships, whether it's Formula One, MotoGP, Supercars, and it's time now to reflect, I guess, on the year it's been. And as far as Formula One is concerned, it's kind of difficult not to look at it with look at it from the perspective of having a glass half empty, because all that optimism that we had coming into the year, new regulations and all, it sort of just teetered away at the end.
Yeah, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you might be viewing this from. But the season's come to an end. It really was a whirlwind and started with a lot of promise. But when you do look on it retrospectively, just the way things petered out in that second half of the season, it is hard not to apply that glass half empty methodology. It fizzled away a little bit, and really it was a bit of a missed opportunity. We thought we were in for, I guess, a reprieve from what we've had the past 3 seasons. It was all in Mercedes going down to the wire. This time we had the traditional 2-team rivalry there, and for a long time it was promising to be something, and ultimately Mercedes again prevail.
Yeah, and I guess it didn't all start off that way anyway. We go back to the first race, the Australian Grand Prix. It's always a great one anyway, just to be there in person as well and see all the action yourself. But I guess the way that Ferrari came out of the blocks there with Sebastian Vettel winning the race, and that just, I guess, ignited what would be the narrative to come for the rest of the season. The fact that we'd have Sebastian Vettel for Ferrari versus Lewis Hamilton for Mercedes, the championship battle that everyone's sort of been wanting over the last few years but haven't quite got. And we remember that before this year, Hamilton was a 3-time champion, Vettel already a 4-time world champion, yet both drivers hadn't really fought each other in terms of a straight championship. I mean, we look back to years like 2010 or 2012 where Hamilton was hampered by, I guess, reliability problems and wasn't one of those main contenders. It was Fernando Alonso who was taking it to Vettel. So for Hamilton this time to come out and fight Vettel straight, I guess, it's what we've been waiting for, and I guess, as we keep saying, it sort of ended or fizzled away at the end.
Yeah, it was just it was almost overnight in a sense. It wasn't so much the way that you could see Ferrari losing its mojo that Singapore Sunday, that they were so much in control through the practice and qualifying, and we really thought this was their moment to get back on a level playing field. And that friendly fire between Vettel and Kimi Raikkonen was the exclamation point, and from there it was all one-way traffic until it was too late, and Mercedes didn't require any invitation from that point. Lewis Hamilton must hand it to him. As much as he's got his detractors there, he just took that opportunity, and there was no coming back from that point for the Maranello outfit.
Well, you talk about Singapore as being one of many, I guess, flashpoints throughout the season. Look back at Baku, for example, as well, the fallout and the controversy from that race when Vettel sort of shoved Lewis Hamilton aside under the safety car and everything. And then, of course, after that mid-season, those races that we had in the Far East, which were just, the worst possible outcome for Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari. And when it comes to proportioning the blame, I guess you could sort of do it 50-50, where Ferrari, with their reliability problems and their finger troubles that they've had all season, and then, of course, Vettel with his own issues there. So, I said this right throughout the season, and then when summarising the year that Mercedes had in particular, is that when it comes to execution, they're still the best team on the grid. You know, Ferrari may have had the faster car at times this season, and that's, I think, another important thing to talk about is the fact that whilst Mercedes ended the year with the most dominant package, I think Ferrari still, at times during the year, were able to challenge Mercedes, but just keeping it consistent, keeping that development on track. And, you know, the Mercedes power unit is still the best, but, you know, Ferrari were able to exploit Mercedes' weaknesses on certain circuits, such as Monaco, Hungary even. Circuits where tyre temperatures were very crucial and it didn't work in Mercedes' favour. So by doing that, you know, Ferrari were able to get the edge. But as far as having out-and-out fastest car, they're still fairly behind. And whether it goes back to that thing that Sergio Marchionne touched on, the Ferrari president, of course, earlier on in the year, whether, you know, quality issues need to be addressed or quality control needs to be enforced a bit more strictly in Ferrari. I guess, you know, when you compare the two teams, who delivers the best product and the execution, how's that all working out? So, yeah, I guess, you know, Mercedes get that big tick in the department, and that's why they're four-time Constructors' Championship champions as well at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think just the way that it exists these days, you could see back to the 1990s and 2000s, the unreliability was rife, but these days one slip up is all it takes and you've lost any of that momentum. So you've got to be just top of your game consistently throughout a campaign. And Ferrari, too many times, they let the ball slip, and Mercedes just so slick, so well rehearsed. Again, they just took that opportunity every time it presented itself, and I think that going forward, Ferrari... you just see, even 2016, they didn't win a single race, but they had plenty of opportunities, and it was more in the pit stop department and that idea of being reactive rather than proactive, which shot them in the foot. And this year, they almost got too complacent when it came to just that idea. They've won a couple of races, so we're all good here. And before we knew it, the wheels had fallen off in the second half of the season.
Well, let's have a look at the statistics more closely anyway, championship-wise, between Hamilton and Vettel. So Hamilton ended up 363 points to Vettel's 317. So, you know, all those points that he lost across Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, it's pretty significant. And then 8 wins to 5 wins, then 11 pole positions to 4. So whilst in the win department...
I'll just 9 wins it was to Hamilton ultimately.
Was it? Okay, there you go. There you go. I already made a mistake here.
When was it? I thought he'd get 10, I think he kept saying after the last few years. So it was surprised he didn't even crack the double figures for
Well,
once,
I guess, you know, the fact that there was more teams and different drivers to take away the wins this year anyway, and we'll talk a bit about Red Bull in a second. But, yeah, so when you look at the comparisons there, you know, Vettel clearly outmatched by Hamilton, and then when you go back, I guess, behind them, when we're talking about Mercedes Constructors' Championship, Valtteri Bottas coming into Mercedes this year, his first year in the team, and the impact that he's had immediately, it's clear to see. And despite all the detractors and the fact that there's been a lot of criticism, particularly just around the appointment in general, the fact that, you know, here he is replacing the 2016 world champion in Nico Rosberg, and will he be able to do the same job as Rosberg, or more importantly for this year, could he play rear gunner to Lewis Hamilton? I guess there was just a lot of unnecessary pressure, but, you know, that's Formula One.
Yeah, just like for like. I don't know whether they're assessing him as a direct Rosberg replacement or someone who could be that counterpart to, I guess, his countryman in Kimi Räikkönen. Certainly on the latter count there, he passed with flying colours, and on the first front there, he wasn't a patch on Rosberg, really taking it to the wire with Hamilton, but that was probably from Mercedes' perspective something that they would have lamented, just the absence of that pressure and just that friction within the team. They really could have operated a lot more harmoniously, and I think that was conveyed fairly prominently by Lewis Hamilton, particularly Toto Wolff and Niki Lauda, just the lack of that stress. So from the outside, you can see people have Bottas there having to perform at a very high pedestal from the outset. We have to remember he only had that appointment at Mercedes officially January 2017, so it all came about very rapidly. And I think really considering just that fresh environment and the I think we discussed the last podcast, the way that the car would have been set up towards Rosberg's liking. He's done a fair job to come in and take 3 victories, and I think 2017, when he's had that full pre-season at his disposal, we can expect to see the best of the Finn.
Yeah, it'll be a crucial year for him anyway next year, and we'll talk a bit about that later, of course. But looking at his numbers this year, so finishing third in the championship, which was a personal best for him since he's been in Formula One. He achieved 3 wins as well, of course, his first one coming in Russia, Austria then, and then, of course, more recently in Abu Dhabi, wrapping up the season, and then, of course, 3 pole positions to his credit as well. So he's been no slouch. There have been times during the year where he's been heavily criticised, or he himself has come out and said that he's undergoing a form slump, which has caused a lot of controversy as to he shouldn't be there next year, get someone else in or everything, or he was either damned if he did, damned if he didn't in that case. But I guess the most important thing you've got to look at here is the fact that, as far as the Constructors' Championship is concerned, his contribution has been quite significant. And when you compare it to Ferrari's Finn, for example, Kimi Raikkonen, Bottas essentially crushed him by over 100 points, or 100 points exactly in the championship. So Ferrari, when you look at those numbers, 100 points, it's a big margin. And, well, Kimi didn't win any races this year, but Bottas, he had one blemish, you could say, on his season, and that was Barcelona, and ever since then he's been pretty consistent. He's always been in the points. He's been on the podium more times than anyone, and I think it was interesting to point out too that in the last quarter of the season he scored the most points of any of the drivers as well. So Mr. Consistent is Bottas, and next year's going to be crucial.
Yeah, even Barcelona, he did play an important role in that limited time he had on the track there, just holding up Sebastian Vettel, and ultimately landed Lewis Hamilton a crucial victory at that time of the season. And he bookended that consistency in the first half when he was I think he had 8 podiums from those first 11 races, and he was probably the person most often up there, whilst Hamilton and Vettel had their I guess weekends like Russia and Azerbaijan and Austria where something went wrong, and then he was able to bring it home strongly. Those final 3 races, particularly with the 2 pole positions, and those final 3 races, indeed, he was the highest point scorer, just to give himself a bit of a fill-up into 2018.
Yeah, exactly. And then just quickly touching on Kimi Raikkonen then too, hard not to be disappointed by him this year, whether, it's his own form that needs looking into, or whether it's just where he's at Ferrari, that they don't really want him to outperform Sebastian Vettel, which is, I guess, well, it's typical of Ferrari, but it's just completely illogical. But he had that 1 pole position to his name though this year.
Russia, wasn't it?
Monaco.
Monaco, that's
yeah.
right, of course.
Well, it's hard to remember. It's hard to remember. It's been that long ago, and I guess probably the only highlight for the Iceman this year, of course. Hungary, I think we highlighted as his opportunity to win the race, but of course, I guess his timidness in passing, or whether the team had orders to keep him behind Sebastian for the championship. It's hard to tell, but, Kimi Raikkonen, he gets another crack at it next year. Can we see him finish his career with some wins under his belt when Ferrari have a competitive car? It's just, there's a lot of questions about Kimi, and it's quite sad too, considering he's one of the more popular drivers on the grid, and everyone likes it when he wins. And it's been now since 2013 he hasn't won a race. So
first race of the season, so it's practically 5 years.
5 years now. So it's hard to then, I guess, see when that next win will come. But we'll move it on quickly. Red Bull as well. It's difficult to think that they had 3 wins this year, of course, and all those podiums, and both their drivers have been quite competitive, because 13 DNFs across both Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen have sort of overshadowed all the success that they've had.
Yeah, just a tale of 2 halves. Both teammates probably had their share. From the first leg up to the end of that European season, it was all in the Verstappen camp. I think he had something like 7 DNFs in the opening 12 races, and all of them he was running in that top 5. And certainly Daniel Ricciardo, the final 5 races, it was a bit of a nightmare for him, and cost him ultimately that 4th. Not that it really mattered in the end of the day, but 4th in the drivers. And I guess from where the expectation was in the pre-season that they would be back to almost the heights of the pre-hybrid era, they didn't deliver. And when they finally got their head around Adrian Newey coming back on board into that early European season, lifted its game, but it was all academic, and the 3 victories they achieved, they were really token for what it was in the context of the championship.
Well, we've talked about it so many times this year, I guess, and is it really necessary that Adrian Newey has to do the rescuing? I mean, surely there is life after Adrian Newey at Red Bull, or is there? That's the big question. I mean, how many times in the past couple of years has Newey said that he's going to be stepping back and doing other things, that he's wanted to do, other projects? We know that type with Aston Martin that they have with the road car that they were producing, the Valkyrie, and then, of course, the America's Cup stuff that he's involved with as well. So the fact that they've had to go back to him again and get that assistance to try and get their season back on track just goes to show that Red Bull just seem to be stuck where they are, or stuck in the past rather than, what their whole, I guess, spiel is about, being in the here and the now. So it's it's a very odd one, that, but also, I guess, not entirely Red Bull from a car perspective, not entirely their wrongdoings. We still had issues with Renault this year as well, and I guess that was seen more towards in the latter half of the season, where we had reliability problems across not only just for Red Bull but for Toro Rosso and for the factory Renault team as well. So there's just problems galore for Red Bull, and it's not been smooth sailing whatsoever since 2014, I guess.
2018's a bit of a pivotal year for them. We know Max Verstappen's committed through 2020, so he's placed his faith there. We don't know what the caveats might be, if it's performance related, so maybe he's triggered some sort of some maybe alteration there that sees it all dependent on where Red Bull shakes out next year, and that future with Honda alongside Toro Rosso, and whether that will be shifted to Red Bull itself the following season. So there's a lot to play out, and we know all the wrangling that's gone on behind the scenes, really. That's where Red Bull's been at it, I guess, since the hybrid era commenced. You hear more often than not they're having some sniping with the Renault camp. It's either Christian Horner or Helmut Marko versus Cyril Abiteboul, and they've each got their own axes to grind, and they've got to look after their own interest. You can see Renault particularly coming back online as with its own interest there as a constructor, and they've got their aspirations in the next few years, so they'll be putting themselves at the forefront, and Red Bull will just have to swallow whatever mandate they have, and if it doesn't involve them as the first consideration, then they've got to look elsewhere. Otherwise, as we've said so many times, what might their future be in the sport beyond 2020, if even next season?
Well, yeah, that's the big question, I guess, whether they stay or do they go, and it points all of, I guess, the direction that they're going in seems like it might be out the door. So, looking back anyway, I guess we talk about these 3 teams, Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, yet we haven't really seen them this year fight all together in a race. Or, we have at times, I guess, Brazil was potentially one of those races, and then when you look at Vettel and Hamilton for the championship, it was really only Barcelona, I think they were really close to each other, and in Belgium again as well, we had that close finish between the two. So what do we want to see next year? We want to see all 3 of those teams fighting. Would you be satisfied with just Ferrari and Mercedes, Vettel, Hamilton, round 2? What do we look forward to next year?
Oh, I think just having that on a consistent basis, Ferrari just assured of themselves, it would be a vast improvement on the, I guess, half-baked version we ended up with this year. Just left us feeling unsatisfied. We almost would have preferred it to be a continuation of the Mercedes domination from where things concluded. So I guess whether it is Ferrari or, again, Red Bull, the way it's worked the past few seasons, they've cycled between those two as best of the rest. But if we can get both in the party, that's great. But as long as Mercedes is held accountable, I think that would be the first concern, just to make sure that interest is there. And I guess at the same time, we can't lose sight of the fact that Mercedes must be lauded for its own achievements, and we can't get into that debate where it's all about how they've got an unfair advantage, because they continue to fight and live up to these high standards. And the way it is looking, it's hard to see them being displaced before the next regulations come into effect from 2021.
Well, this was the year that I said at the start of the season that would define their legacy, and the fact that they've actually come out and won both championships, whether they had the fastest car or not, just proves that they are truly a great team in this sport. So, yeah, it's very, very good to see. I guess for Mercedes, probably not good for the sport for the sake of competition, but whether we have to wait till 2021 when the regulations change once again for them to be brought to their knees, we'll wait and see.
Absolutely. It's going to be a long 3 seasons, that's for sure, if Ferrari slips back to its old habits and Red Bull continues to be in this melee with ambivalence, just not committing to the sport, and a fair few outfits, even Mercedes itself and Ferrari, the usual suspect there. They always want themselves to be the first consideration in any future of the sport. So the next 12 months off the track will also be pivotal with those negotiations around the framework for whichever shape it does take. And we know that they've had a bit of issue with the first set, which came out in the past month. So it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with, into 2018, as much as we're looking forward to what happens on track.